It's cold, it's damp, it's early, and I'm walking around London recording this Zestology for the start of 2020. Happy New Year. Yeah, it's very chilly this morning and quite dark as well. You know when it's so cold that your nose is running? It's a nose running cold day. But I suppose I'm full of hope at the start of 2020 because there is something about the start of a fresh year, the fresh start, the page turning that is particularly nice, and I always enjoy the feeling of the year stretching out ahead of you, full of infinite possibilities. Doesn't always pan out like you hope, does it? But at the start of 2020, I do quite like the start of a new year when you get the chance to cogitate on what you'd like to achieve in a particular year. And over the past few years, I have kind of got quite into goal setting. I don't really do it so much anymore, but certainly for quite a while when I was studying NLP, I would be very into writing. We don't really call it goals in NLP, we call it outcomes. So I would write out my outcomes. I'd write out in all different areas of my life how I felt the year had gone. So how I did in 2019 in different areas, work, health, relationships and so on. And then 2020, same categories, what I wanted to achieve. I don't really do it anymore. But there are a few things that I do want to achieve in 2020 that I thought about ahead of this podcast. I want to be more present and less distracted. I want to be more in the moment with whatever I do. So whatever I'm applying myself to, just doing that and nothing else. I'm really bad at multitasking. And the increasing awareness of that comes with age is very helpful. So that's one goal. Another one is just try to forget about politics for a while. It's so depressing. I just don't want to think about it anymore. Don't normally go too in depth on politics on this podcast, and I'm not going to today either, but just to say, when something relentlessly depresses you, it's probably not a good idea to engage with it all the time, even if it is important. There are plenty of things that make me feel far chirpier though, and one of them is applying myself to this podcast, which is definitely my passion project, I suppose, or one of my passion projects. And at the start of 2020, I'm very excited to bring you David Sinclair, the world's premier authority, I would say. He might be too modest to say that, but I would say on longevity and aging. And this podcast is utterly brilliant. It's just so good. It's such a great way to start 2020. It's such a great way to improve your health. And, his thing is not just longevity, but it is having a healthier quality of life as well. Now, at the end of the podcast, I asked him the question that I asked everybody, which is, what is one book that you recommend and one tip for living with more energy and vitality? And that was my favourite moment of this podcast. Because I asked him, I'm walking under a tunnel at the moment, so I'm going to be very echoey. I asked him, what is the one thing you recommend for energy and vitality? And he said, that's easy. He said, I don't even have to hesitate. I'm paraphrasing a bit here. But he said, I don't even have to hesitate. There's so much research in this particular area and there's so many studies that what I'm going to recommend to you, I'm pretty sure definitely works. And I was thinking, wow, what's coming? And I was very happy with what he said because I do it already. So if you want to skip to that bit for longevity and good health in your old age as well, then you can skip to the end of the podcast. But really, what he says in this podcast is, look, there's loads of stuff, there's loads of research, and if you follow the stuff that I mentioned in this podcast, in my book, then you'll live 14 years longer. 14 years longer. And I do think that is very compelling. He has applied himself and his career to studying aging and longevity, and that's what he's worked out. So I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of David Sinclair. Just remains for me to say Happy New Year. I'll be back at the end of the podcast, and at the start of a new year, I think this is a really good way to get back on it. You may well have had a few too many mince pies over the festive season, and you may well have indulged in turkey or whatever it is you indulge in a little bit too much, but that's okay, because David Sinclair is here to help you get back on the wagon. And I'll see you at the end of the podcast. Here he is, David Sinclair on Zestology. Okay, well, I'm recording now, so let's get underway. David, thanks so much for agreeing to do this interview.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, really been looking forward to talking to you, and I feel like aging and longevity ties in very well with energy and vitality. I know that you say aging is a disease, and that disease is treatable. I kind of thought perhaps a good starting point would be to explain to my listeners what you mean by that and how that is kind of one of your theses for writing your book.
Right. Well, I have a book on my shelf here in my office where it's called the Merck Manual of Geriatrics. And I often open it up just to remind myself what the difference is between diseases and aging. So if you look up diseases, it says these are deteriorations of the body that lead to frailty and death over time, loss of function. And then if you look up aging, it says exactly the same thing, except that it happens to the majority of people who live long enough. So I've always thought, since knowing that fact, why is it that if something happens to 49% of the population that's horrible, we throw billions of dollars at it? But if it happens to 51%, we say, yeah, that's natural, happens to most people, let's just not worry about it. And that cutoff is ridiculous. And in fact, I argue in my book that because it's the majority of us, we should be addressing it even more. We should be trying to understand what causes aging. And the other thing to remember is modern medicine is built on addressing diseases once they occur. Now, I call it whack-a-mole medicine. Mm-hmm. You treat the patient, push them out the door, they get sick again, they come back, you give them another medicine, push them out the door, and you repeat that until failure. And of course, we're getting better at treating these diseases and trying to prevent people from falling off the edge of the cliff without even ever thinking, what is it that drove the person to the edge of the cliff in the first place? And that's aging.
Yeah. So you kind of go into how aging occurs, why aging is a disease in your book, and then you go into kind of some of the ways, technology, lifestyle changes, supplements, that we can live for longer, but also live healthier as well. I suppose that's the key thing, isn't it?
It is. You know, I'm called an aging researcher, and some days I feel that way. But it's all about health span and longevity. Those are the words that I like to use, because what we're finding in the lab, and studies of people who live healthy lifestyles and even take medicines that we think may slow aging, these people live very healthy into old age. So they're at 70 and 80, they still feel 20 and 30. And even beyond 100, they're still very productive and excited about being in the world and teaching their great-grandkids things. And then they die fairly suddenly. Their bodies become frail and then they die. It turns out it's not just better for the person, it's better for the family because you're not paying for your relatives to be in nursing homes. But it's also good for the economy because someone who lives that long, over 100, costs about a third the overall cost of someone who dies at a regular age. So the health span is the important point. So when I ask people, how long do you want to live? Often they say, 90 years old, because they think, God forbid, I know what it's like to be 90. But we have to remove that view because what we're talking about are lifestyles and technology that will allow us to be 90, sure, but feel as though we're still in our 30s and 40s.
Yeah, this is the really exciting thing. And I think I wonder how much this is very much of the moment, what you're talking about. I mean, I first heard you on, I think, Joe Rogan's podcast, and I think I heard you with Dave Asprey as well. What's been the reaction since the book's come out? Do you feel like it's something that's really capturing people's imagination right now?
Oh, I definitely do. I could feel it changing about a year ago. And in part, it's generational. The youth of today, kids between 15 and, say, 40, in my view, are much more optimistic about technology in the future. And whereas, people in my generation, I'm 50, they're a bit disgruntled, maybe having lived through some bad events, the financial crisis and that kind of stuff. I love the younger generation because they basically have grown up with supercomputers in their pockets, which nobody would have ever imagined 30 years ago. So anything is possible. And this idea that we should tackle aging and we can tackle aging seems very natural to them, as natural as it does to me. And I've been shouting from the hilltops my whole life. But it's really reassuring, comforting, and a lot of fun, actually, that particularly the youth have loved this idea and gotten behind it. And for that reason, I think the book's done a lot better than I expected it to.
Yeah, so about a year. And how long have you been in this field for?
Well, so I'm 50, and I started doing research into aging when I was 24. So, yeah, half my life I've been doing this. But I've always wanted to do this since I was 4 years old, when I, like everyone else at that age, learns that aging is a thing, and it's going to make everyone you love go through a period of pain and suffering. To me, it was, why isn't anyone talking about this? Why do we block it out of our conscious? And the answer is we've evolved to do that. If you think about pain and suffering every day, you can't function. You'll be crying the whole time. But I'm not crying every day, but I'm certainly doing my best not to forget that this is a reality for all of us.
I think in depth, not superficial, but in depth wellness advice and thought is definitely, I mean, you know that this is my kind of part-time gig, but I also work for Sky down the road here in London, and when I think about what that workplace was like 14 years ago when I joined there, and I was the bloke who did that self-helpy weird stuff on the side, compared to now, it's unbelievable. People really want to know about this stuff and are really actively interested, my contemporaries, and they weren't before, in making lifestyle changes, diet changes, and so on. So I think, can we get onto the good stuff straight away? I mean, what's the kind of thing, what are you most excited about at the moment in terms of aging and longevity? And it might be one of the central pillars of the book, or it might be something that's just kind of popped up in the last couple of months.
Yeah, well, we've figured out, we think, how the body's aging and even how to reverse the clock. That's the bottom line. And that's only been in the last couple of years that I'm more and more certain of that. What that means is I can take your blood and estimate how old you are, not by your birthday candles, but how old you are aging biologically. And that starts at birth or even before that. So you're always aging. And the more you can do, even at a young age, to live well, the slower that clock will tick, and your future self will thank you for it. But the real breakthrough has been to be able to control aging. Now, most of this is in animals, in mice so far, but aging is a process that's conserved all the way down to yeast cells. So if we figure this out for mice, I bet my career, I have bet my career that mice will tell us how we age as well. And what we found with mice is that they have a ticking clock. It's called the DNA methylation clock, which is a measure of how the genome is organized in 3 dimensions. And also what we found is that you can reverse that ticking clock by gene therapy. And in doing so, we've been able to take old mice that have lost their vision, reprogram their retinas, and restore their vision completely. And actually those retinas, if I gave them to you and you could measure their age, you would say these aren't just behaving as though they're young, they literally are young again. And that's the big breakthrough. And now we're working towards making these treatments available to patients with diseases such as glaucoma, the pressure in the eye.
So that's gene therapy.
Well, currently it's gene therapy. It's a combination of 3 genes that come on usually when we're embryos. And it seems to be quite safe. But ultimately what we're working on in the lab is, can we do this with a combination of molecules? Could it be a cream? Could it be an injection into the eye? One day, could it be a pill that we all take when we reach the age of 40 or 50 and we get rejuvenated and our clock can go back 5, 10, 20 years? And the exciting thing about it is we've reset a mouse once and it worked great. We are currently testing whether you can do it twice. We don't know. Maybe you can do it 100 times. We'll see.
The difficulty is testing it on humans, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's not difficult. It's it's hard to raise the $1 billion it takes to get through that. And
Yeah.
gene therapy, this is one thing that's not well known in the general public, is that gene therapy has taken off incredibly. It's becoming fairly commonplace to have gene therapy used for genetic diseases, sickle cell anemia, blindness. These are standard things. It's expensive currently because it's only a few years old, but eventually it will be fairly normal to have gene therapy for particular diseases, and eventually, I think, aging. But the problem is it's such a hot topic. So many companies are working on this that you just have to get in line. Even to make the virus to use in your experiments or your clinical trials takes a couple of years and up to $10 million. It's a gold rush right now.
What about some of the stuff that's actionable now then? I mean, certainly you've changed some of some of the supplements that I take, some of the ways that I live my life, having listened to you. And I haven't actually read Lifespan yet, but it's on my list to read over the next couple of weeks when I go on holiday, and I'm very excited about it. But one of the things I've heard you talk about is resveratrol, so perhaps we could kind of start there on the supplements. I heard you talk quite passionately about this, and I've been trying it. Well, first, tell me why you think resveratrol might be important in terms of aging.
We discovered a link between a set of genes called sirtuins and longevity. And this was when I was a postdoctoral researcher at MIT. And we were studying yeast cells and trying to figure out why do they age and can we slow it down. And these genes turned out to be really important for controlling the aging process. And we could put in more copies of the SIR2 gene, it was called, and the yeast would live 30% longer by mimicking calorie restriction or fasting. And so we had a handle on the genes that provide the health benefits of fasting, and in our bodies we now believe things like exercise are driven by these sirtuin genes. We have 7 of them in our bodies. And in the early 2000s we were looking for easier ways to turn on these sirtuin genes than gene therapy. And we came across a group of molecules that are made by stressed plants. And the most potent one at the time was called resveratrol. And you can find relatively a lot of it in red wine.
Yeah.
Still not enough of it to treat a disease, that's for sure. You only have a couple of milligrams in a glass at best. Pinot Noir has the highest. But it's a good source over the long run. I have taken resveratrol, and I continue to take resveratrol about a teaspoonful into my yogurt every morning, a little yogurt that I make myself. And I do that based on a lot of research. Some has been published by my lab, where if we give mice resveratrol, they are seemingly totally immune to a Western diet, and they live as long as a lean one. And if you combine resveratrol with calorie restriction, or intermittent fasting, I should call it, they live even longer combined. And it has very little downside. We haven't seen any negative effects. And other labs have shown protection against the cardiovascular system, against diabetes, against cancer. So the upside looks promising. There have been some clinical trials that have gone well and shown lowering of glucose, lowering of cholesterol. Admittedly, there have been some clinical trials that have failed to show any benefits. And I think the reason is that resveratrol is very insoluble. And if you just take a dry powdered pill of this stuff, it's not going to get absorbed. We know that from mice. We know that from humans. And that's the reason I mix it with yogurt. But yeah, things look good. My cardiovascular system, my health, my age are all on track for me to live a relatively long life, despite my terrible genetics that I inherited. But yeah, I'm experimenting on myself, not because I'm trying to live forever. I really don't actually care when I die. I'd rather not die than die. But what I'm trying to do is to push science faster. I mean, I don't want us all to be born one generation too early. And if we don't hurry up, we will be that generation.
Yeah. The resveratrol is really interesting then. I've definitely not been taking it the way that you do. I have been taking pills, and I think you take about 1 gram a day, don't you? Yeah,
it's about that. A teaspoonful ends up being that, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've been taking about half of that in pill form. So, and one of the things that I have noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I feel like my attention span growing up and even now is naturally not particularly long. But I do feel that when I take resveratrol, my focus is a little bit more targeted, and my focus levels are a bit improved, actually. Is that something that you've noticed as well or not?
Yeah, most people I talk to, that's the most noticeable effect. The other thing that I hear, and it's all anecdotal, right, is improved REM sleep. And so people are having better dreams and not waking up feeling tired. And that, even though it's anecdotal, it does fit with the mouse data showing that the sirtuins, particularly sirtuin number one, controls the body's clock. And it's possible, it makes at least sense, that by taking resveratrol at the right time of day, and I hope you're taking it in the morning, it will help reset your clock nicely and give you some energy in the morning.
Yeah, morning or lunchtime, depending on when I eat.
Yeah.
But and then, I mean, the other supplement I wanted to ask you about is NMN, which I haven't taken, but I've heard you talk about before. Is that something that you still take?
Yes. So everything that I wrote down in the book, which is, if you want to go to the cheat sheet, it's page 304.
Oh, fantastic.
I wrote it all down. If you want to understand why I do what I do and why you might want to vary your lifestyle, definitely go back and read the rest of the book, particularly the middle of the book, part 2. But yeah, it's all listed out. I haven't changed what I do. NMN is part of my daily routine. I take it in the morning. The reason I take NMN is because we've had some remarkable results in mice, and it seems to be very safe. These are my 2 criteria for trying something.
Yeah.
If I wait till it's proven, I'll be 70 and it'll probably be too late for me, and certainly it'll be too late for my 80-year-old father. If you're wondering why don't I just wait for proof, that's the reason.
Yeah.
But it's important to know that what I'm saying isn't proven in humans yet. It's just very promising. So NMN is what we call an NAD precursor. The body uses it to make NAD. And NAD is an important chemical for the body for 2 reasons. The first is, if you remember back to high school days, NAD is a cofactor in many metabolic reactions, hundreds of them in the body. And without NAD, we'd be dead, probably in 30 seconds. But the second thing that we discovered in the 2000s is that NAD also is telling the body when to hunker down and survive. It's also regulating our defenses against aging. And the reason is these sirtuin genes that we work on, they make enzymes that control the body's defenses. They tell other proteins what to do. They help package the DNA. We think they slow down the ticking of the clock. They need NAD to work. This is their fuel. And so if you think of resveratrol as the accelerator pedal for these sirtuin enzymes, NAD is the petrol, the gas. And so the combo, I think, should work the best. And the other thing to consider is, it seems, at least by measuring NAD levels in the skin, that the levels go down as we get older. And by one study, by the time you're 50, my age, you have about half the levels you once did when you were 20. And that's not good for anybody, I don't think. We need NAD, and the higher the levels, the better our body will fight aging. So I'm supplementing that in the expectation that my sirtuins will be hyperactive and keep me younger and keep those diseases at bay. And I monitor my health as well quite extensively, so I'm not doing this with any blind faith.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. And I absolutely know that people listening to this right now are Googling NMN and resveratrol and everything else. I was thinking about why you were talking about aging and how you feel like, a lot of these diseases are so much more prevalent than they were, say, a generation or 2 and 3 generations ago. How much are environmental factors playing a part in that? Because one of the things I often think is, we try and make some good choices in terms of having natural ingredients around the home, in terms of cleaning products, food products, plastic wrapping and that kind of thing. But I often think, if you're putting, a real heavy-duty bleach down the loo or something like that, I mean, how much does that actually make an impact in terms of our long-term health in perhaps ways that we don't even know yet?
Yeah, well, so I'm a born skeptic. So whenever somebody says, "Oh, X in your home causes cancer or causes whatever," I want to see proof of that. It doesn't. It shouldn't just. I'm not going to stop using X because it feels like it should be right. I've looked into the data because I wrote the book, and I'm actually more and more convinced that agents that we use are contributing to aging. And the reason for that is that we've figured out that what's driving this aging clock, in part, and possibly even in large part, are broken chromosomes. When our DNA is broken, this disrupts the packaging of our DNA. And in the process of trying to put it all back together, the clock advances and cells eventually lose their ability to function. That's what we call aging. So things that break our DNA are really bad for us. So obviously going in the sun is going to lead to some breakages, and we can see wrinkles appear because of that prematurely. But what about other things in our lives? Radon gases breaking DNA, flying in airplanes, PCBs, chemicals from plastics being microwaved, even X-rays are going to do some damage to your chromosomes. So I try to limit all of those things as best I can until proven otherwise. So yeah, I've definitely gone from that can't be right to it's not worth taking the risk.
Good, yeah, because I mean it's difficult, isn't it? Because I'm the same, but I don't have the scientific background to back up my hunches with rigorous research. But I have to say, I do slightly bristle when, for instance, these X-ray machines, especially in America, that you have when you're about to take a flight, and they want to send you through the machine, and you can ask to be manually searched, and you always get a lecture from one of the security guards saying it's no problem, mate. It's just like switching the TV on. Get in there. I always rather bristle at that, but it feels instinctively right not to subject oneself to extra X-rays if possible.
Yes. Well, so X-rays you'll get mostly at the dentist and at the doctor. So those scanners, they're a lot better than they used to be. There were ones that actually did cause issues, but fortunately they've been banned from Europe and then a few years later in the US. Okay. Now they use low-intensity millimeter waves, and I've looked into this. I think the chances are much less than they were 5 years ago of causing a lot of DNA breaks. What I'm told by people and what I'm reading is it's similar to the amount of radiation you would get on the actual flight. But considering that I'm flying 1 million miles every few years, why would I want to double that exposure? Yeah. It makes no sense if I don't have to. So just in an abundance of caution, I try to take the express lane and avoid those scanners. But the other thing to consider, which does concern me, is so broken chromosomes are just regarded by everybody, with perhaps the exception of me, the only thing they could possibly do to you is to cause cancer. But no one is considering what they could do to your long-term health in terms of aging. The experiments are long. Nobody's ever put a mouse in these scanners or under an X-ray machine for long periods of time. And I think what they'll find is that there's a chance that it would accelerate aging. That's my dream, is to get one of those machines and just keep scanning a mouse and see if it's okay. Because you're not just disrupting your DNA potentially. It's the effects on the epigenome, this clock, which is I think much more fragile than the actual DNA molecule.
Right. And I think one of the themes that's emerging from our talking now is the fact that the decisions that you make now impact you way down the line, even down to, I mean, you mentioned a few moments ago, microwaving plastic. That is something, I don't do it, but I did do it for a lot of years. But that is probably something that a lot of people do. Is that something that you definitely think is a no-no in terms of the DNA?
Well, you're not going to die on the spot, but what's important that you said is that it's all cumulative, right? You might say, oh, it's fine to go get sunburnt. It's fine to microwave plastics. It's fine to be exposed to chemicals in the garden. But yeah, by the time you reach 60, you're likely to have accumulated aging. Your clock is ticking all the time. And you got to be aware of that. It's going to show up later And what you do now, if you behave well and live well, is going to reap benefits down the line. If you look at twins, and there are some twins, identical twins, one that smokes and one that didn't care what they ate versus the other one, we can tell that 80% of our health in our old age is non-genetic. It's in our hands. And it makes a huge difference how we live. And the earlier you start, the better.
That is very inspiring. I'm planning on putting this out right at the start of 2020. And I've got a feeling that after a Christmas and New Year of excess, people will be getting right on it listening to you. So the question that I always ask everyone is, what is one book that you would recommend and one tip for living with more energy and vitality, especially at the start of the new year? And I'm looking forward to your book because I believe it's going to be a nerdy choice.
Well, my book's not that nerdy. It's written with something for everybody. It's got history and art, philosophy, and some fun science thrown in. It's similar to the book I'm rereading right now. The book is called Black Holes and Time Warps. And I expected it to be nerdy too, but it's similar to my book in that you can read it to an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old and they really love it. The author is Kip Thorne. And what it does beautifully is it says, okay, let's imagine that we're on a spaceship and we're going to fly to this black hole, and then we're going to fly over to that black hole, and then we're going to dive next to the black hole and see how the world changes when you do that. It'd make a wonderful TV show for kids. And I'm young at heart, and I'm not a physicist, but I found it really, really engaging.
That sounds excellent. Very good. Okay. So yes, that sounds good. And no, it doesn't sound like a nerdy book at all. Sounds excellent. What about your tip then? I mean, there's been quite a few already, hasn't there? But what would be your tip for living with more energy and vitality?
Sure. Well, I have a list, but if there was one thing that really will change your life in a significant way, not just now how you feel, but in the future, and it's based on a lot of evidence. So I can say this with utmost certainty. It's to eat less often. And it sounds like you do that from something you hinted at. It's intermittent fasting. What I do is I skip breakfast as much as I can. I have a tiny spoonful of yogurt, but that's it. And if I can, I try to skip lunch too. And then I have a regular dinner. The dinner is, I try not to eat a bunch of French fries or whatever, but I still eat normally when it comes to nighttime. So that's made a huge difference to my life. I feel way better, and a lot of people say that as well. And what you're doing when you're hungry is you're turning on your sirtuin defenses, and there are some other accessory pathways that you also activate when you fast. So that's the first main one. There's other things you'll find in my book, such as the high intensity interval training, sleep, cold water baths mixed with sauna. These kind of things are great. And then there's some other molecules that I've added, including a drug called metformin, which is prescribed typically to diabetics, but increasingly looks like it benefits normal people, healthy people, and prevents diseases of aging as well. So those are my tips. I do put out tips on social media too, so follow me there if you'd like to keep updated. Yeah.
I mean, the intermittent fasting thing, I feel like it's such a simple change. I don't think I ever enjoyed breakfast that much anyway. But, I mean, we talked about focus levels earlier on. I mean, if I don't eat in the morning, which is almost every day, the difference between my focus levels and my output before lunch and afterwards, especially if it's a bit of a carby lunch, it's massive. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah.
I've tried to avoid sugar most of my life, starting in my late teens. Can't remember the last time I drank a fizzy drink, a soda with sugar in it. And my kids are the same. But it's hard. I mean, everywhere we go, it's bread here and pasta there and rice.
Yeah.
These things are, I think, things that we should avoid. That's what I've been doing. Doesn't mean I'm religious about it. I'm very I'll occasionally steal dessert even from my wife some days. But yeah, keep the carbs low for sure. There's a lot of argument about what you should eat, and there's the carnivores versus the herbivores. I think we're omnivores, so I don't strictly say I'm one or the other. I try to eat stressed plants that have been held under conditions, grown under conditions that aren't typically favorable, because they make molecules. We call these xenohermetic molecules that are good for the plant, but we think are also good for us. Resveratrol, which we talked about earlier, is an example of a xenohermetic molecule that's produced by stressed plants. And you can look for plants. They're organic. These plants are typically full of color when they're stressed out. They're dehydrated before they're picked. And I think I'm interested in perhaps starting a company that only serves foods that are stressed out before they're picked and put on the table. But that's if you do all of that, it turns out that it's been calculated you get at least 14 years longer life than someone who doesn't pay attention to what they do.
Wow. I mean, that's basically got to be the title of the podcast. Live 14 years longer by listening to this podcast. David, yeah, that's really good. Thank you so much. Very inspirational, and I'm glad I do some of those things already. Where can people find the book, find out more about your research and everything else that you're doing on social media and everywhere?
Yeah, well, the book is available at local bookstores in the UK and in the US. And if you want to just order it while in your pajamas, you can get it from where all good books are sold online. I have a website and a newsletter sign up if you want updates. It's called lifespanbook.com. And on social media, Twitter and Instagram, you can also find me.
David, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. As I say, I've been a big fan of yours for a while, and really looking forward to talking to you. And good luck with everything you're doing, all your research and your books as well.
Hey, thanks, Tony. It's been great being on your show. I really enjoyed it too.
I told you that was a good one, didn't I? Really enjoyed what David Sinclair had to say, and I feel refocused. And actually, as I walk around London recording the start of this podcast, and I've come onto a main road now, so it's a little bit trafficy, one of the items in my backpack is resveratrol. So I'll be taking that later on. Look, at the start of 2020, I'd like to say Happy New Year to you. Thanks for being a listener to Zestology. I will endeavour and try to make it useful and helpful for you to live an energised life, a motivated life in 2020. And if you've got any suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the podcast, or what I should or shouldn't be doing, then I'd like to hear that. You can go to tonywrighton.com and let me know. You can also visit my passion project. That is one of my goals for 2020, to kind of make that a little bit more prominent and get more people to visit it. If you go to histamineintolerance.net, I've set up a histamine intolerance site, and you can sign up for my mailing list, get some free stuff as well. And I think that is definitely one of my goals for 2020. And the other goal, as weird as it might sound, is to do less, to relax more, do less, sleep more, holiday more, relax more, play more, work out more, but do less, if that makes sense. It doesn't really make sense, does it? But you know what I mean. Do less, do more of nothing. Before I go, a quick shout to my partners, Sunlight and Saunas. They've been fantastic partners over the last couple of months. I know there's quite a lot of people getting in touch with them from Zestology, actually, which is very nice. And if you mention Zestology when you get in touch about a Sunlight and Sauna, the infrared sauna, which is absolutely head and shoulders ahead of all the rest of them, made out of the ultra clean, beautiful wood, low EMF and everything else, they will give you £200 or $200 off. And remember to mention Zestology. So shout out to Sunlight, and more on them coming soon. In fact, a podcast recorded in the Sunlight and Sauna in the next month or so. And have a good start of 2020. Happy New Year. And I'll see you at the start of next week.